and thank you for joining us for the 14th of 19 candidate forums for the 2021 general elections in the Cayman Islands, being hosted by the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce in association with Foster's. My name is Mike Gibbs, and I have the honor of being the current president of the Chamber of Commerce. I will also be one of the panelists asking the questions this evening, along with Mr. Shamari Scott, president-elect of the Chamber. I'd like to begin my opening comments by welcoming West Bay South candidates Raul Nicholson-Coe and Andre Ebanks, and thanking them for accepting the Chamber's invitation to participate in this forum. Your willingness to appear on the same platform demonstrates to voters that you take the democratic process seriously and are ready to respond to a series of questions on the top issues as identified by a recent online Chamber survey. More than 400 responses and more than 200 questions were submitted via the survey, and these will help to frame the questions for this evening's forum. There is certainly not enough time to ask all the questions, but we will do our best to cover the topics that have been identified as the most important to the Cayman Islands and the West Bay South constituency. When the Chamber was established in 1965, the goal was to create an organization that supports, promotes, and protects the interests and welfare of its members and the wider community. Being nonpartisan, we have hosted forums every election year since the 1988 election. So for 9 elections, we have provided members of the community with an opportunity to hear from their candidates and educate themselves before Election Day. These forums have taken weeks of planning and preparation, with all the credit going to the hardworking Chamber staff, but would not have been possible without the financial support of our sponsors, Foster's, Affinity Recruitment, Bodden's Legal and Corporate, and DART, so a very big thank you to them. I would also like to extend a wholehearted thanks to our media partners, Cayman Mile Road, Cayman Life TV, Radio Cayman, Government Information Services, and ICCI FM for agreeing to broadcast tonight's forum. It is the first time that we have live streams of the forums on the internet, and we hope that this new format will enable even more people to watch them from the comfort of their own home. It is now time to begin this evening's forum. I will therefore turn the proceedings over to Will Pineau, CEO of the Chamber, who will serve as this evening's moderator. He will explain the rules of the forum and introduce tonight's West Bay South candidates.
Good evening, candidates. The rules for tonight's forum are as follows. Each candidate will be asked a series of questions. You'll have 2 minutes to answer if you choose to do so. Each candidate will be allowed to answer the question without interruption and is free to differ with an opinion or position of another candidate during your allotted response time. We're asking that you deal solely with the issues, and at the conclusion of the forum, you will each be given 2.5 minutes to deliver a closing statement. I'll now introduce our West Bay South candidates. We'll begin with Andre Ebanks. Mr. Ebanks has nearly 7 years of public service experience, most recently as the Cayman Islands representative to the United Kingdom and Europe, where he represented Cayman's political, policy, and regulatory affairs. He was previously Deputy Chief Officer in the Ministry of Community Affairs, overseeing the Department of Children and Family Services, the Needs Assessment Unit, and the Gender Affairs Unit. Prior to that role, Mr. Ebanks served as Senior Legislative Policy Advisor in the Department of Financial Services Policy and Legislation. Mr. Ebanks began his career at Appleby, Cayman, and subsequently worked in the Investment Funds Practice Group of Walkers, Cayman. With a Bachelor's of Arts in Sociology from Morgan State University and an LLB from the Truman Bodden Law School, and a Master's in Legal Practice from Manchester Metropolitan University, he was called to the Bar of England and Wales by the Middle Temple in 2005 and the Cayman Islands Bar in 2006. Mr. Ebanks has been a council member of the Caymanian Bar Association, is a past member of the Cayman Islands Law Society, and a member of the Honorable Middle Temple in England. His community board memberships include Generation Now, the Human Rights Committee, the Gender Equality Tribunal, and Cayman Airways Limited. Mr. Ebanks is married with 2 children. Welcome.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Raoul Nicholson Co. is currently the CEO owner of Catalyst. Previously, he was the CEO of Digicel Cayman and presently serves as a senior advisor to the board of directors. He was also the CEO at AT&T Wireless Singular in Cayman and the president and chief operating officer and director of Telecayman Limited. His extensive experience also extends to a number of boards in both public and private institutions. He served as a trustee on the board of directors of the Chamber of Commerce Pension Plan and a member of the Cayman Islands Cycling Association. He is also a former board member of the Caribbean Utilities Company and the Cayman Islands Monetary Authority. Mr. Nicholson Co. was also the deputy chairman of the Technology and Infrastructure Network team of the Special Economic Advisory Council. He is a board member of Big Brothers Big Sisters of the Cayman Islands and a trustee of the International College of the Cayman Islands. Mr. Nicholson Co. holds a diploma in telecommunications engineering and has successfully completed executive management courses at the Wharton Business School, Heriot-Watt University MBA program, and the University College of the Cayman Islands. For the last 8 years, Mr. Nicholson Co. and his wife Kathy have been major supporters of the John Gray Memorial Church Food Pantry, and most recently, Mr. Nicholson Co., Kathy, and Marcia Milgate have founded the Community Soup Kitchen in West Bay. Welcome both candidates, and when we return from this commercial break, we will begin this evening's round of questions. Please stay tuned. Candidates Forum for West Bay South. I'll now turn it over to the President of the Chamber, Mr. Michael Gibbs, to begin the round of questioning.
Thank you, Will, and once again, good evening, candidates. The first question I will address to Mr. Ebanks, and then Mr. Nicholson Co. will follow up with his answer on that same question. So that first question is, what makes you the candidate of choice for the voters of West Bay South?
Thank you for the question, and thank you to your audience. I believe that West Bay South and Cayman is at a crossroads. We've had long, complex problems that have existed for years, but the COVID pandemic has ripped the Band-Aid off of those problems. With a paused tourism industry and a challenged financial services industry, we are now seeing these problems come at us with intense velocity. I therefore believe we need the most qualified and most experienced hands on deck to take the country forward. I therefore believe I am the best choice for West Bay South on the following grounds. 1, I am a West Bayer. I've not only lived in the district, but I've also lived in the constituency. I come from a long, proud lineage where strength of character and uplifting your skills of your people has passed down from my great aunt, Beulah Smith, to my father and on to me. 2, I'm a blessed husband and a father of 2 young children, which fuels the passion in me to fight for their future, which is now at risk. That's why in 2014, I left a large law firm and a large salary to move to the Ministry of Financial Services to work for the country and the industry as a whole rather than one private enterprise. And then in 2018, I moved to the Ministry of Community Affairs to fight for the most vulnerable, to oversee the Needs Assessment Unit, Children and Family Services Department, as well as the Gender Affairs Unit. I then moved on to fight for Cayman on the front line in the government's London office, to be our representative, to walk the halls of the UK Parliament with class and integrity, to show them what Cayman is all about and fight on the front line. I therefore want to apply all of those skills to be a servant leader, to be the person who knows how to walk the halls between the ministers and civil service, to deliver the service to our diverse constituency of West Bay South. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe, same question.
Thanks very much, Mike. Good night to everyone. Cayman is actually at not only a crossroads. We're facing unprecedented problems. Our elderly are retiring without any ability to fend for themselves. Our youth don't have any opportunities. Our kids are not being educated to a level that makes them effective in this new economy. And we need people like myself who have worked for the private sector at very high levels. I have 30 years experience at senior management level. I know how to implement stuff. I know how to implement ideas, strategies to make a difference. We don't need policymakers. No, we have fantastic civil servants who are great at creating policies and can know what the issues are. What we need are ministers and members of parliament that can implement, that can understand policy and deliver. What we need are CEOs running ministries that understand all facets of running a ministry. A ministry now consists of $120 million in expenditure. We need people that understand HR, understands legal issues, that can hire lawyers to actually help them, that can hire accountants that understand all aspects of running a business, because the government is a massive business. It's about $1 billion in terms of expenditure, 827 to be exact in terms of expenditure this year, USDI, which is about $1 billion US. So what we need are people that understand these issues, that can empathize with people. I've been through West Bay, from Chestnut Street in Badabanu to all the, up to Billam Anderson Road on Town Hall Road. I understand these issues. These are not people anymore. These are not statistics. I actually know their people by name. So we need to have people that are empathetic, that have lived in the district for 43 years, that actually is not going to be parachuted into the district, that live there now and have no desire to leave. We need people that are accessible, and that's me, 24/7. I'll roll my sleeve up, what I've always done, to actually deliver on these things. So it's not something that I am going to be parachuted and I'll leave the district at the end of the night and forget about the promises. I actually know everyone by name that are suffering in these streets in West Bay, and that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make sure I make their lives much better.
Thank you.
Good evening, gentlemen. So, Mr. Nicholson-Coe, I'll start this round with you, and it has to do with national issues.
Yep.
Keeping Cayman safe from the COVID virus and the reopening of the economy are amongst the top issues that will confront the next government. What other major issue concern do you intend to bring to the table for the new government to address?
Well, they're massive issues, I think, especially around employment and opportunities for Caymanians. At the moment, there's full employment, but we have a massive issue with the hospitality industry. And West Bay is disproportionately disadvantaged because there are more West Bayers that have worked in the hospitality industry. I see that as being a massive issue. I also see education as being a massive issue that has to be addressed, because we cannot have a service-based economy and not have our people trained and have the skill sets to be able to deal with these issues. We live in a society with 135 different nationalities, but our public school system don't actually emulate our society. And that is a disadvantage, because our kids coming out of high school are not equipped to be able to deal with the modern day world. And the other thing that we have to look at is, because our financial services is under threat, and I'll actually get to that later on, we have to look for other pillars. So we have to look at promoting medical tourism, promoting sports tourism, but the massive thing that we have to look at is technology. We are moving to a service-based economy. At the moment, the ICT sector only accounts for about 3% of our GDP, which is $4.7 billion. We have to increase that by 100% to about 6% of our GDP. And we can do that by enabling new forms of technology. So digital IDs allow people to be digitally ID'd from before they arrive in Cayman. So somebody arriving from the US could pass through customs seamlessly, could be able to do KYC stuff in our financial services industry without having to go through the reams of issues. And that's one of the issues, and STEM as well. So establishing a fiber optic network to Cayman to allow these companies to exist. These companies now exist and are in Ireland, for example, at a flat 10% tax rate. If they come to Cayman, they'll actually be able to enjoy much more favorable tax position, but we'll create a new industry with highly skilled people, persons that can work and deliver on stuff for Cayman, but also inject a lot of capital into Cayman. So that's one of the I have to diversify the economy, but through education as well.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
I think a long list of issues is fine to outline, but I think we are lacking vision. I came across an article in the 1988 News Star in which a journalist by the name of Will Pinot interviewed Sir Vassal Johnson as he was exiting public life. And in response to a question about starting a financial services industry, Sir Vassal said this: in 1965, I visualized that someday the Cayman Islands would become one of the leading offshore financial centers. And he went on to say that in order to do that, he had to pass legislation, have current and careful planning, and pick the right people to take the country in the right direction. What we are missing is that overarching vision of what we're going to be as a country in the next 10 years. We did it before, so Vassal was able to set out a vision and achieve it with proper planning. So I'm going to show you tonight that all of the issues that we're talking about connect back to an overarching vision that we need to benefit Caymanian families, secure a strong economy, and advance a sustainability agenda. We do that. Most all of the questions that are going to be raised here tonight will touch on the issues of cost of living, access to land, unemployment, enhance human services, prioritize gender equality, fit-for-purpose education, diversifying the economy, focusing on tourism, and reorganize our borders. But if we don't come in with a structured plan and a vision of where we are going to go, all of the long list of issues that want to be had will be done in a haphazard, dysfunctional way, and we will not go anywhere forward. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. Mr. Ebanks, staying with you for the next question, which goes from national issues to more specific constituency priorities. So what major project would you like to achieve over the next 4 years to improve the quality of life for the residents of West Bay South?
I think in my role as the Deputy Chief Officer of Community Affairs, which allowed me to walk all of the districts, including West Bay South, and in my canvassing as a candidate, there are major issues that now face the unemployed, our youth, and our seniors. We need to put programs in place, and some of them are in place and need to be expanded to have the unemployed not only have the education that they need, but also training programs for supplementary training in terms of resume writing, interviewing skills, to make themselves more marketable and talk themselves into jobs. And also with our youth, we need to have other programs we could take, say, for example, Sir John Cumber's hallway on Saturday and propose a program to have positive, stimulating activities to take their minds off of negative activities and occupy them, stimulate them with computer code. This isn't just a dream. When I was in the community affairs ministry, we worked in public partnerships to be able to create Code Cayman, where young children from ages 10 to 11 were learning to computer code. So they get the training early and be able to establish those skills in the future. That was also applied in Gender Affairs Unit, where we did the exact same model for women. So they would be able to discover from all ages, from 18 to all the way into 45, to be able to have a supplementary income in a new industry. We also need to do the same thing with our seniors. Yes, I know certain programs are in place and the Department of Children and Family Services is doing the best that they can, but we need to do this on a more regular basis. We need to incorporate our seniors as ambassadors in schools to impart culture and history, and also in the hospitality industry. These are our ambassadors. We are going to lose our culture if we don't incorporate our seniors. And we should use our seniors in other ways to be put on boards where they were part of the industry and can impart their knowledge and take industries forward. Thank you.
Same question.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe, the same question.
Thanks, Mike. I mean, through my walks through West Bay Road and West Bay South, I've been through practically every street in West Bay South, and the overarching theme is just opportunities for Caymanians. And that runs the gamut from Caymanians that have just graduated to seniors that are 65. So we have to create a program to be able to help them. But more specifically, we have to create a program for persons that have been displaced as a result of the drop in tourism. And we now have a golden opportunity. They're being given a stipend of $1,500 a month. Immediately, the moment within my 100-day plan is that I will work with the hoteliers and get those people retrained, retooled to be able to take these jobs once the economy opens. So, for example, a boat captain, obviously someone that understands customer service, can deal with multiplicity of issues. I would get that person trained. He may be an ideal bar manager. He may be an ideal maitre d'. Get those persons trained so that when we open the economy, at the moment, the hotels are running at 10% occupancy. We have the golden opportunity. The cost will be minimal and they can actually deal with that stuff. But more specifically in the district of West Bay, what I would like to see, West Bay South, is work with creating a new environment for the promenade against Miramali Road to actually enhance that area. The West Bay South area is a fantastic, beautiful area. We also should be looking at creating a multi-use hall that can be not only for meetings, but have a swimming pool. West Bays are known as seafarers. We're known as it historically. Why aren't we have the best swimmers? We have had heroes that have been known to swim during shipwrecks for hours or days in order to save their members. We also need to look for a facility for the mental health and to be able to support people, because we've seen a lot of that in West Bay and we need to be able to deal with those issues. But the opportunities exist for us to now retrain our persons that are in the hospitality industry and also to deal with issues. The John A. Comber Primary School is a massive issue there with a food program, and also literacy. So those are all the things that I'll be dealing with in my first 100 days when I'm elected.
Thank you. And for this question 4, I'll start with you, Mr. Nicholson-Coe.
Yeah.
And it has to do with a question I think everybody will be interested in, coalition and alignment.
Right.
So many candidates in this year's election have identified themselves as independent.
Mm-hmm.
If elected, would you be prepared to join a coalition group party? And which ministry or position in the new government would you want to fill based on your skills and qualifications?
Right. Well, given my skill sets, right, my skill set would be on infrastructure, development, and also on new technology. And that's where I would like to focus on, new business development. Clearly, I'm an independent, a true independent. I had nobody on my platform from any other parties. These are independent thinkers, independent minds. And I think it would be interesting when people say that they're independent, they're truly independent, because if not, we're fooling the voters. And it's at this age in 2021, we shouldn't actually be trying to, we should be transparent, we should actually be candid, and we should be open about our allegiances. I have not had any discussions with any parties, but clearly if I'm going to be part of a government, I'd have to work with people that have the same philosophical bent in terms of from a social perspective, but also from a financial perspective. And those are the critical things for me. And also to be able to deal with things that don't create issues for Cayman and distractions to affect our brand. We need to work with people that are going to be honest, that are going to work together, and they're not distracted by other things. We need people that have demonstrated, that have experience, that have worked in industries, that are not there just to follow, but they're there to lead. Because what we're going to need are leaders that understand, that have been able to negotiate deals, that are able to sit with the new hospitals that are being built that you are part of, and to understand how can we make the agreements more equitable so that society benefits. Those are the sorts of things that I would like to get involved in. That's why infrastructure, inward investment would be something that I would love to be a part of. But it's also important for us to understand that it's critical that when we have investors and when we bring these investors, that we work with them together to make this a much better place. So from a philosophical perspective, I'm willing to join a grouping of people, but they have to be with the same philosophical bent for me, socially, politically, ethically, in order for me to work with them.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks.
Thank you very much for the question. I find it a strange response to say that because you are currently working with people who may have been from other groups, that somehow makes you dishonest or an unethical character. Nothing could be further from the truth. This is a small community where people have come from different walks of life and different experiences. And I think that goes to the root of the question. The question is, can you work with other people? Yes, I can. In my capacity, not only in the private sector, but in the public sector, I learned crucially about being a civil servant and having neutrality and objectivity. And that has stayed with me to be able to put aside, when we were arguing over legislation in the Legislative Assembly when it was then called, when we were talking and bringing cabinet papers to cabinet, you had to be able to look across the table or look across the aisle and be able to work through legislation and policy and even programs to get things done. So the fact of the matter is, if I am so blessed to be elected to be the member for West Bay South, I will work with all the other 18 members because we have to. The people pay us to get things done. In terms of a coalition, I will be able to work with any individual who has come through the democratic process, but I won't, and work with them, but I will not be led by anyone who doesn't share my principles and my values. In terms of a ministry, I believe that if I'm so blessed and that offering is there, that generally people do better by things that they're either qualified in or have experience in. Therefore, I would be comfortable in a role in a ministry for financial services or community affairs or international trade and investment, because I've worked under 3 ministries and under 3 ministers. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ebanks. Staying with you for the question number 5. So there will be we'll take a break after this question. This question focuses on affordable housing. Land and building costs are increasing faster than wages, and banks continue to require substantial down payments when applying for a mortgage. What is your view or strategy to give ownership opportunities for affordable housing in all districts?
Thank you for the question. I think it raises one of the key components and pillars of my campaign. Because we don't have the overarching vision and plan and development plan, development is racing. Developers are able to have an uncoordinated approach to development that is allowing people who've never, ever set foot in Cayman to purchase property at extreme prices, which is pushing the values up. It's incumbent upon government to institute a sustainable development plan for the entire country. Thereby, developers know the rules of the road and are able to then, with private sector and citizens, to know what areas we're going to protect, what areas are fine for development, and then what types of development in zones. So to answer the question, while we have to have zones that are going to be for affordable housing, in order to convince developers to do that I've been in conversations with while canvassing, that's the appropriate use of concessions at that stage, to work with Caymanian developers, not necessarily large foreign developers, but Caymanian developers. And West Bay South is a perfect example where you have Caymanian developers living in the constituency and young Caymanians who can't afford it. They will be able to see that vision, and that's our unification point as a country, to use the duties and concessions and waivers in an appropriate manner to convince developers to have affordable housing. And then we also need to look at our duty and tariff structure to be able to say so in a way as a sort of a taxing jurisdiction would do. If we're allowing $400,000 as an allowance for first-time Caymanian buyers, why not apply and waive it as taxing jurisdictions do and say if the house is $550,000, why don't we waive the first $400,000 and apply the tax just to the $150,000 that's remaining? Because even though a Caymanian can come through the debt ratio analysis of the bank, they might not still be able to afford the ancillary costs. We need to lower those to be able to break Caymanians into the market.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe, same question.
To answer the question specifically, which is to allow, how do we allow persons that can't afford a home? I think within my first 100 days of being elected, I'm going to reduce the import duty and tax to 7.5% stamp duty immediately. So immediately the cost of owning a home for a first-time buyer is 22.5% less. There are other specific things that can be done as well. As you may know, along the West Bay Road corridor, under the planning law, there is an affordable housing fee. That's a set fee paid for any apartment development that has 11 or more units. The problem with that is not a gradated scale. So you pay the same $20,000 per apartment, whether the apartment is $500,000 or it's $20 million. And my view is that because it's an affordable housing fee, we should have it based on a per square foot basis, just like we've done for other fees that we pay. So the impact fee that you pay 4.5%, for the infrastructure impact fees based on square footage, we could immediately put that, and we would then increase the affordable housing fee, which would then allow persons to be able to get access to that. The second and more and specific things on persons that don't have high disposable income. For example, in the hospitality industry, they only allow your base salary to be taken as your salary to decide whether you have the proper risk ratio. I am going to suggest and work with the banks to say you take also the gratuities. So it's an average over a 12-month period. So immediately you raise the bar to them to be able to afford a much larger mortgage. And you can then work with the banks to create this stuff. And banks can create more affordable mortgages. They may have to reduce that, but we have to work together as a society. And that's what I'm good at. I'm actually able to work with people from a diverse constituent and stakeholders, bring them together and understand that if we don't fix housing as a social issue, we'll have disenfranchised voters, we'll have disillusioned and disenfranchised voters. And when that happens, that affects the entire society, not only the individual not owning a home. So this is a societal and it's an existential crisis that we need to deal with.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the candidates, gone through the first 5 questions for tonight's forum. When we return, the next 5 right after these messages.
Thank you.
I'll turn it over to Shamari Scott for the next round of questions.
So this round has to do with beach access. And Mr. Nicholson-Coe, I'll start with you. What will you do to ensure that the proposed developments in the area by Governor's Harbor will not have a detrimental effect on public beach access and traffic in the area? Right.
Well, the scale of that development obviously is large, but I think it's a reasonable. The developer has done other fantastic developments in the district or in West Bay. We can work with them to alleviate that. Beach access is something that's critical. Its heritage is part of who we are as a people, a Caymanian people. And those things have to must be preserved. And I think any developer, investor would see that as a benefit because it enhances their product. It makes their product more authentic. It makes their product more appealing not only to the locals, but to also people that are visiting Cayman. I think that that's what people want to see, is authenticity. They want to see a part of Cayman that existed in the 70s and 80s. We don't have to lose that as we develop. The other part in terms of traffic, clearly that's something we have to contend with. But in my view, what we should do is work with developers and say, create a transportation plan for your workers, for example. So instead every worker having a car, there's no need for that. If we create a transportation network that will collect workers at their homes, bring them to work, and take them back home. This happens in other countries, neighboring countries that have far less resources than we do. So in my view, any development that's multi-use, multifaceted, and of a certain scale, they should include within their application a transportation plan that will reduce the need for every employee to have a car. And secondly, those cars should be low carbon footprint cars, so they should be electronic in most instances, or some other sustainable way. So you reduce your carbon footprint, it makes it more sustainable. And what we have seen, the trend in real estate and people purchasing and looking for real estate, will see Cayman as a sustainable way of living, but also a sustainable place to visit. Because people that spend money and looking to spend money in other countries want responsible developers. We want a responsible nation, because we have to preserve what we have. The 7 Mile Beach is an amazing jewel that must be preserved for generations to come.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
Thank you. As I mentioned at the outset, majority of these questions are going to link and return back to my premise. We need an overarching development plan. What is being discussed in this question is the current application by DART of a planned development area. That is essentially, at root, an owner saying, this is what I'm going to do with a block of land. What needs to happen is government say what's going to happen with the entire country's block of land and set the rules and parameters in place. Therefore, what is going to happen now, and we must recognize it, that we have citizens in our country, in our constituency, that have grave concerns about this development. I've attended the West Bay Action Committee. These aren't people who are just sort of guessing. They have grave concerns and they need to be recognized to preserve their rights. But instead of this devolving into acrimony and tension between concerned citizens and the developer, what is missing in the equation is government having an overarching development plan so everybody knows the rules of the road, and then will be able to plan accordingly to reduce the tension in our society. So when that plan is then promulgated, this question then becomes easy, because we've already worked out the mitigation of the traffic. We've already worked out the infrastructure and social economic implications to the project, and therefore citizens are informed, beach access is appropriately protected, and we then move on as one society, rather than, where I can see where this is headed, an explosive exercise between concerned citizens and a developer, which is entirely avoidable.
Thank you, sir.
Staying with you, Mr. Ebanks, the next question focuses on the area of civil partnerships. And the question is, what are your views on the recently enacted Civil Partnership Act?
Well, this matter arose when I was in my capacity as a representative for the Cayman Islands to the UK and Europe. So I saw it from that unique vantage point. I watched with close attention the debate that ensued in our then Legislative Assembly. I have to say that I can understand the views of hotly debated issue. And we are not talking about an us and them. We're all talking about people and their legitimate concerns around this issue. But as a qualified and trained lawyer and an ex-Human Rights Committee member, I cannot resist the argument that what this was about at base was providing equality of legal rights. There was a legal rights gap in our legislation which this fulfills, and I think it is time for the country to recognize that and accept it as the law.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Nicholson-Coe.
Thanks, Mike. I don't believe in discrimination in any form, and I think that the law actually enshrines and creates a statute that protects not only same-sex couples, but also heterosexual couples as well, who are poor partners, and allow them to exist as one. And I think that as the country, we have moved to a place where we are a bit modern, we're more cosmopolitan. And it's something that as a country, we have to understand that these things happen. And at this moment in time, it was the right time. I would have hoped that the Assembly could have actually arrived at a decision without having the governor enacting his powers to do what he did. But it's something that I feel that is right at this moment in time in our country.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe, once again, I'll start with you.
Again.
Education is always one of the issues discussed and often criticized during the run-up to each election.
Right.
What changes, if any, would you propose or support to improve public and private education?
Well, the first thing, actually, Shamar, this is actually a fantastic question. And this is when I look at education and I go back and look at when I was in high school, and perhaps when you were in high school, our high school system was fully integrated. It was an integration not only from a student perspective, but also from a teacher perspective. We were able to get skills, acquire skills from teachers from all over the world. And I think that we have done ourselves a disservice by segregating our schools. The kids that are coming out of school now, unless they are exceptionally brilliant, right? They will succeed and they will continue to be successful. But there is a percentage of kids that are actually being disadvantaged because of an experiment, not an experiment. It was an economic decision that was taken that became a social disaster. Because we have kids that are coming out now that are not equipped to operate in this new world. And I would reintegrate the schools immediately, from primary schools to high schools. I would also ensure that we have a STEM program, not a STEM after-school program, but a STEM program that's established from kindergarten up to high school. I would also integrate the two colleges, the University College and ICC. I would integrate and become one college, a University of the Cayman Islands. But not only are we looking to provide bachelor's degrees in others, but we also provide a trade program as well. A trade program that instead of people making $6, they can make $20 as an electrician immediately. And do this and destigmatize these jobs. These jobs are jobs that were done in the 70s and 80s. All the condominium complex that were built behind us were built by Caymanian tradesmen, like Mr. Jimmy Powell, like Mr. Walton. These were all people that built this country. Mr. Norberg Thompson. These people are all involved economically from an entrepreneurial perspective. And that's what we have to encourage, but we have to destigmatize it. And we also have to destigmatize people working in our hospitality industry by making sure that the hospitality training school is an integrated part of any new development.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks.
Thank you. It was obvious that this was going to be a question tonight, Shamari. And so I did a little bit of research to go back to prior chamber forums. Question arose in 2017. Question arose in 2013. Question arose before that. And here we are again. It's fair to say now we need a material departure from the existing system. Or guess what? 2025, you're going to be asking this question again. We now need to move to a system that takes education out of the political cycle and create an authority in which gives the educators a framework that they can operate in independent of the political process, where they can hire and fire as needed based on performance metrics and hard data, where they're given the resources. It is true that reintegration is necessary. What is happening now is that we are examining in full throttle two Caymans. It's not only an educational problem, it's a sociological problem, and it's also a financial problem. You have persons who are working well beyond their means because they're deathly afraid of the public school system. That means they don't have disposable income for extracurricular activities, for extra resources. We now need to build a fit-for-purpose education system. We do not have the capacity at this moment to flick a switch and do reintegration full stop because it's not physically possible. But what we can do is set out a system based with public-private partnerships to create small schools. We don't need grand, huge schools. We just need to get started and have an education system that goes from age 1 all the way to seniors, where we are starting with early education, identifying issues, support services, STEM, blockchain, new industries, medical tourism, that have the framework to let our people loose. Thank you.
Our next question moves more towards the stayover tourism area. And obviously, tourism is an important pillar of the Cayman Islands economy, with many small tourism-related businesses suffering as a result of the closure of our borders. What are your views about the timeline for reopening the borders to stayover visitors, I should say?
As in my last post, having spent 9 months in UK lockdown when COVID was now being discovered and very scary, I can tell you that being in a country that's economically shut down, physically ill, and also playing on your mental health, this is not a game to be played with in the political realm. It has to be driven by the science. We have to increase our vaccination penetration deep, at least minimum the 70 percentile range, and also be studying the infection rates. But the border is two ways. It's also protecting who's in here and also who's trying to come in here. So we also have to work with the science to identify the jurisdictions that are coming in and making sure that that's adequately safe, that they have been vaccinated. And maybe we will be able to relax the quarantine period, but that will come with being vaccinated and then also being tested on both sides of entry, departure, and entry. So I cannot see that, unfortunate as it may be, that we can open up haphazardly, because we already we do have a pause in stress tourism industry, and we have to do what we can and increase stipends to sustain folks. But if we lose the other engines of the economy that are working now, if COVID were to get loose, then we're going to end up in some of the situations of our sister overseas territories who don't have the luxury of those industries. And so they have to gamble. They have to try and open up because they have nothing else. And then they shut down again. Then they try and they get shut down again. We have to do this in a sustainable, sensible way, but take advantage of the pause and upskill individuals and get them back to work so that we're ready to work when we can open sensibly.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson.
Yeah, I mean, we're in a fortunate situation. The government has actually done a very good job in terms of taking us to this position. And I think we all, we live in a very fortunate country. But we also have to think about how we're going to kickstart the economy. And can't be done in isolation. We have to do it methodically. We have to think about, obviously, infection rates on when we get to herd immunity and true herd immunity. And true herd immunity, we can decide we have inoculated 75% of the vulnerable people here. We could also be targeted. We could go to particular gateway cities and said, yes, we'll get tourists or stayover visitors from a particular area that we know have a low infection rate, that also have a high inoculation rate. But it has to be done in conjunction with stakeholders, including the airlines. I mean, now airlines have introduced a COVID passport, so they're actually thinking about this. We have to partner with airlines, with hotel chains. Marriott, we have Marriott here, they own the Ritz, they own the Marriott, they own the Westin. With Kimpton is a large hotel chain. They also have standard operating procedures in terms of how they get visitors. So we need to engage those private sector stakeholders and understand what their timelines are, because we now have a golden opportunity. We have a golden opportunity to change and create a paradigm shift in terms of what type of visitors we get in this island. We will have to reduce the number of tourists arriving on cruise ships. I think that market is gone for a very long time, but we could reposition ourselves to get high-end cruise tourism that actually remain on island for a longer period of time. Smaller ships, but they will actually remain and spend more money. So I think gives us an opportunity, but we have to engage. We have to use science, but we have to also engage our stakeholders, because these guys have millions and billions of dollars at stake. We need to work with them. They have best practices, and we work with those people, making sure our medical facilities are up to speed, but have a timeline. Let's set goals. Let's set objectives, because the goals can move, but let's set at least an objective. This is when we'd like to open up. These are all the steps that we need to do before we open up, and then we will go from there.
Thank you.
Mr. Nicholson Cole.
Oh, again.
With you again.
Yes.
Public safety is the next question.
Oh, yes. Mm-hmm.
Are you satisfied with the level of policing and public safety in the District of West Bay? What improvements, if any, would you advocate if elected?
Well, public safety in West Bay, public safety generally is something that we have to look at across the board in West Bay. There, I think clearly we always think we need new police officers, but in my view, we need more technology. We need to employ technology to help with crime prevention. Yesterday, ironically, as I walked through, I actually visited a home, and there's people speeding along this road continuously, and that's one of the recurring themes in all of it. But we can use technology. We should be able. We can't continue to hire officers. Officers need to actually do the paperwork. But if we employ technology, for example, to have speed detection cameras, and we have cameras now, we can upgrade them. We can put them on every street in West Bay to be able to prevent crime. And what we'll do, we're going to preventive then, as opposed to reactive. The moment a crime is perpetrated, we then have to go through investigations. We perhaps incarceration. You put somebody in jail. It's $70,000 to keep them in jail. What if we do something that prevents people, knowing that if they do something, they will be caught, and the investigative process can exist and it will provide. So technology is critical. We can also employ analytics as well. We need to employ analytics because statistics can show where propensity to actually commit a crime. We know a lot of these things exist. We can go to find best practices in other countries that have employed technology. So I don't think the policing at this stage could be better in some areas. Of course, it can be better. It's never perfect. But I think that if we employ technology and augment the human element of actually crime prevention, we can actually do a better job. But we should also think about rehabilitation as well. Because crime occurs, but if we don't fix the issue, the root cause of why somebody commits a crime, the propensity for that individual to commit another crime increases. So let's get the medical profession involved. Let's get the psychologists involved, the therapists involved, and technology. We could then create a model that we can employ in other countries.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
Thank you. Technology and stats and analytics are all well and good, but we are a small community. What is missing, in my view, in the level of policing, and I know that there are some very hardworking Caymanian police officers, but what is missing for me is the community link to police officers. So policing is only as good as the link with the community. If the community has an inherent mistrust of the police, then they're not going to talk. They're not going to identify crimes. So yes, you can employ radar and technology for speeders, and that needs to be done because it does impact our citizens on a quiet Sunday morning when cars are racing and we wake up to knocked over light poles. But in terms of the question itself is about the level of policing, the level needs to come down to the grassroots so that they know the police officer. And that doesn't take more policing. That just takes a different strategy of policing to be able to be integrated into community so that folks can now reach out to the police officer, identify issues, and help solve crimes. That is what is also missing on top of the technology. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
We've completed the second round of questions, so please stay tuned. Right after this short commercial break, we'll begin the third round. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for West Bay South. I'll turn it over to President Mike Gibbs for the third round of questions.
Thank you, Will. This next question will be addressed as previously to Mr. Ebanks. Focuses on minimum wage. What are your views on the current minimum wage of $6 per hour and the knock-on effect to the cost of living of any future increase?
Thank you for the question. This is a subject that is indicative of something that happens in Cayman, whereby minimum wage needed to be instituted. It took a very long time to get there. And now that we get there, we can't let what's happened in other areas just lag and we not make appropriate modifications. We can't let this, particularly when we're in the middle of a global pandemic, to just sit. The current framework allows for a review of the minimum wage. That should go forward to find out what is now reasonable, acceptable to move to institute that, because the only other way to deal with the cost of living is to increase earning power. And if we don't do that, then those who are facing the reduced wages will feel the harder pinch of the cost of living. So we need to, in rapid fashion, conduct that review and be able to make appropriate modifications to increase the minimum wage where suitable. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe.
Yeah, great question, Mike. I think we need to move from a minimum wage to a livable wage. We need to look at that as a livable wage because that creates a lot of social problems as well. But irrespective of whether you increase somebody's wage, you also have to look at the cost base. So coupled with that, we have to look at some way in reducing the cost of basic goods. So review the custom tariff laws, understand those laws. I mean, there's some anomalies that I have seen in the law in which it states that we have salted eggs, fish rolls, which is at 0%. That's caviar, right? In my definition, the people that actually can afford caviar can actually afford to pay duties on it. We need to look at it and make it a more equitable approach. So increasing somebody's wage, you actually the push-pull economic issue can create inflationary pressures as well, and we don't want that because that invariably will increase prices, will reduce the ability to their disposable income. But if we create a system where we look at cost of living at the same time where we look at increasing wages, we actually can then find some equilibrium where the shocks to the market could be lessened. So that would be if there been a consumer protection legislation created by 3 QCs that actually hasn't been enacted. And we need to start looking at these types of legislation. I think in 2017, it was actually done at 3 eminent QCs and 2 other lawyers. They have looked at all aspects of consumer protection. And I think when you see the current stakeholders that are based on economics or on persons providing services, they would see the benefit of actually looking at this so that it makes their product more accessible. And we have a society that functions the way it should function. So it should be a livable wage coupled with looking at cost of living.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is question 12, and it has to do with the environment. And Mr. Nicholson-Coe, I'll start with you again. West Bay South includes some of the most developed and highly sensitive environmental areas with some of the last remaining mangroves along the West Bay Peninsula. What is your view about the ongoing and future development of this area?
Well, I think that sustainability is critical, and we can't look at sustainability purely from an economic perspective. We have to look at it from an environmental perspective. So there's certain areas in West Bay that I have been through. Barkers, for example, I actually ride my mountain bike through there. It's a pristine, amazing place that should be left untouched. We have to also look at expanding the areas that are now protected for sea life and understand that those things have to be protected. But we also have to decide all people that actually make a living through the sea. Some of my supporters are fishermen, and they make a living through the sea. They understand that they respect the sea, but they also make a living from it. So we have to, as a country, just like we provide subsidies to farmers, we also have to think if we're going to diminish the ability for a fisherman to actually increase his catch and have him to respect the environment, we must do so by helping them to augment their salaries. We also see in countries, there are examples of environmental disasters. based on economic realities. If you fly over Haiti, I don't know if you ever had the chance to fly over Haiti, but there's a distinct line between Santo Domingo and Haiti. And the reason why there's a line is because people chop down the trees to be able to feed themselves. If they had the ability to provide for themselves and not having to destroy the trees, there wouldn't be a need. So let's empower our people, provide them with economic incentives so that they don't have to look to the environment for subsistence. And that's my view. But it has to be protected at all costs. But we also have to think of the human cost as well, so that the two things can work in parallel and we can work in sync and complement each other.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
This issue is not just near and dear to me as passion. It's one of the central points and pillars of my campaign. If there was no COVID, the environment would be the marquee geopolitical issue by far. In order for us to capitalize on this as a country, we already have a 2011 climate change policy that's in draft form that has not been fully adopted and implemented. We need to make appropriate modernizing changes to that policy and get started on climate change. Other jurisdictions are so passionate about this, including the UK, that they actually put this subject area under the equivalent of a chief officer who's under the leader of the country, because it gives it that prominence, and then create a cross-ministerial team. So that climate change chief officer or czar is now checking in as a list of all the things that all the ministries need to do to adapt to that policy. Because whether we like it or not, climate change impacts and permeates through every ministry. In order to do that, that would then flesh out the areas that need to be protected, like Barcas, like other areas where we need to protect our natural resources. It also then changes the image of the island. If we now, and I can't see any reason why Cayman can't be the regional leader in climate change, we then uplift and change the image of the country. Internationally, I can tell you from being on the front lines, we are looked at as some tax haven money pit. If we are now the regional leader in climate change and show how we're taking in our backyard, the issue is smacking us in the face. Look at the landfill today. How long are we going to wait and have parents hustle to get kids out of school? We need to address this issue now and change this country.
Thank you, sir.
Staying with you, Mr. Ebanks, changing tax somewhat here, moving to health insurance. Health insurance premiums continue to increase annually for many businesses and especially for persons who reach retirement age. What improvements, if any, would you propose to make health insurance more affordable for businesses and retirees?
This question is another one of those questions, like education. If you go back and look at the Chamber's last two debates, the last two election cycles, not this cycle, the last two cycles, so 8 years ago, this question continues to plague us. We have to get serious and first admit to ourselves that the current system is not sustainable. If we can at least agree on that vision, that overall premise, then we need to start looking at alternative systems. Systems that either we have a universal plan, a base plan that everybody pays into, and that if you have additional income, or if you're in a higher economic tier, then you can maybe have private insurance on top of that. But we have to take care of the entire country first. Or other systems that exist in places like Singapore, where they actually have a savings account added to it, and that you actually been able to pay in, and then you can utilize your savings account. Now, that might be advanced for now, but we have to start thinking bold and moving this issue forward to transform the current system of the copay and deductible arrangement and having our health services spending time chasing bills up and in chasing insurance companies. That has to end. You're not upskilling the people and using them to actually implement a system to deliver health care for our people. We're wasting time, we're wasting money, and at the end of the day, our people are not secure. This has to be a marquee issue of the next government.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson.
Thank you, Mike. Well, actually, I don't think we need to do a study or a research on this. We don't need to do another paper. We don't need to do that. We know that this isn't working. When I walk around to the districts and I meet people, they actually are seniors that cannot afford healthcare and are suffering as a result of that. So we don't need that. We know empirically we have it. Anecdotally, we know that it doesn't happen. But what we have 5 hospitals here that are world-renowned hospitals. What we should do as a country, we should pool resources and find the best hospital that provides a particular service with the lowest cost. So let's find center of excellence. And instead of everyone doing oncology, find a particular hospital that is great at oncology and let that person be the systems expert. And they will then have the economies of scale to be able to reduce costs and provide seniors, specifically seniors and the vulnerable and kids, with a lower cost of delivering healthcare. The other thing that we should do is actually create a pooling or resources in terms of purchasing power. So instead of each individual hospital purchasing their pharmaceuticals, we purchase it as a country. Immediately economies of scale chip in, and the price of pharmaceuticals and drugs will decrease significantly. We could then work with the insurance industry and look at how do we create an HMO perspective and look at that and create a model that fits Cayman. But I think we have to think in the future as well. Let's create a sovereign wealth fund that can deal with these issues. The cost of healthcare isn't going to drop. We know 7.9% of the population is above the age of 65. That is going to continue to increase. And the cost of delivering health services to those will continue to increase. So let's create a sovereign wealth fund, use whatever surplus we have, and put that in and invest it privately, and to allow government to be able to provide these services in the future without having to tax businesses to do it. Sovereign wealth fund we know it works in places like Norway. Norway has one of the largest sovereign wealth funds, is $1 trillion. If they liquidated that fund today, every Norwegian will be a millionaire. I'm not saying we're going to get to that, but we have to start thinking not in 4 years' time. We need to start thinking generationally.
Thank you.
The next question has to do with youth and youth matters. And Mr. Nicholson-Coe, I'll start with you again.
Yeah.
What do you regard as the top 2 issues facing our youth today, and how do you intend to address these concerns?
Well, to be honest, the top issues facing the youth today, I mentioned education, but opportunities. Opportunities for when they become educated. It's unconscionable to have a Caymanian individual. We have a young Caymanian supporter of mine, voter, who is a high school graduate, an exceptional student. It's not fair for her to have sent out resumes to many different companies and not even given an opportunity for an interview. We cannot develop as a country in that way without taking care of our youth. And then the second part of that is that if they get a job, how do we allow them to get part of the Cayman dream? And the Cayman dream isn't buying a car, isn't going to the bank and the bank said, yes, I'll give you $40,000 to buy a car. Immediately, once that car is driven off the lot, it loses 20% of its value. The Cayman dream is owning piece of Cayman. How do we create and reduce the barriers to entry so that when a college student returns, they actually feel like they can actually own part of Cayman? Because if we're not developing for Caymanians, then we're not developing. I have a Cayman first mentality, and I mean Caymanians that are generational and Caymanians that became Caymanians 10 minutes ago. We're all in this boat together. I went through a number of streets on Hennings Lane, and I met a lady. It was the most disheartening discussion I had with someone when she said, my kids are now at university, and I've told them, don't come back because there's nothing for them in Cayman. That is not what we want. We want Caymanians to go and equip themselves, come back here to get the best jobs and to continue to develop like we have been, because we are a country that is inclusive, that is hardworking, but we cannot allow people to become disenfranchised and disillusioned. So I see opportunities for Caymanians in education are the critical things to continue the success of this country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
There's 2 things that we really, really need to work on for our youth, is increasing their access to the job market and making them as most marketable and attractive as they can. And those who have had stellar degrees are getting the jobs that they are qualified for and getting rid of this nonsense of being overqualified. I saw it firsthand as a representative to the UK and Europe before COVID when we'd mingle with students. I can't tell you that that was one of the most pleasant surprises of that post, was to see that the future is bright of our young Caymanians. My generation may have been 5 or 6 disciplines, but these students now are coming back with IT degrees and masters in blockchain, masters in brain surgery and heart surgery. If we don't provide an alternative set of industries in terms of medical tourism, tech, film, we are not going to provide the atmosphere. So it's all well and good to say that we've all walked the streets and we're all Cayman first, but the question is the how. The how is to be able to provide that platform so that you say to our Caymanian students, this is the reason why we need your brains to come home. This is why we don't have this brain drain. We provided an atmosphere that allows you to get the job, the earning power, and to pursue your careers. In addition to that, we're taking a step back before you get those, because those who are here with us now, we also have to think about, which links back to the education system, of making sure that we have the services in place, not just education, but academically, but vocationally, to have an expanded job market to make Caymanians as attractive as possible. And the last issue that I would say, because it's two, is mental health. Today's youth are dealing with challenges that I would have never anticipated, that I don't know how I would grapple with. It is good that it's being recognized by organizations, and we need to pay attention to this now and help boost the mental health, particularly during COVID.
Staying with you, Mr. Ebanks, the next question is actually the 15th question, so we'll take a break after this one, is on the future of financial services. Given that financial services is critical to the island's economy, how do you think the country should respond to the FATF grey listing and the European Union's intention to blacklist us, even though we have met most of their requirements?
Thank you for the question. This is another central pillar of this campaign, is to secure a strong economy, and partly doing that is securing financial services. It is unfortunate. I was on the front line and witnessed the hard work of our many civil servants and private sector participants to work extremely hard to get from 60 out of 63 recommendations, and to fall short by 3 hurts. But it does mean that, unfortunately, according to the standard, we are going to be gray listed. We have to do everything in our power to meet those recommendations. And some of them are going to take longer because some of them they are all related to performance. So some of them are in relation to whether or not we've had enough prosecutions here. You can't invent a prosecution. All that we can do is put the tools in place to be able to try to get off as quickly as possible. The EU, on the other hand, is not as structured and format and prescribed as the FATF. So what that's going to require is engagement with the EU to understand how little we fell short, how not difficult it is for us to mitigate these risks so we are not as large as a threat. But there's a more fundamental issue here, because our country, and I've seen it firsthand in my post representing us in front of the EU, is going to face continuing waves of regulation. What we need to do, and what I've seen work, is proactive advocacy that's data-driven, where you have the Monetary Authority, you have the Financial Services Ministry, and industry bodies, Chamber included with Cayman Finance, to be able to put up proactive arguments to the EU. They're always going to continue to suggest that we do things their way. We need to take a step back and analyze each proposal and say, well, if it strengthens our regime, then we will tailor it accordingly and we'll do it. If it doesn't strengthen our regime, we need to put forward and advance the arguments to say why it is not suitable for our jurisdiction and prevent it before we have a fire and we're trying to put it out at the last minute.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson-Coe.
Thank you for that. The financial industry is critical to Cayman. Roughly 60% of Caymanians are actually employed in that industry. It provides 60% of our GDP, which is $4.7 billion. But we didn't actually have to go on the grey list, because what they wanted us to actually regulate the private funds. This should have been done. We got off in October last year. As a result of the private funds being registered, government revenues went up by $40 million. Had we done this 10 years ago, it would have been $400 million. Could be $1 billion fund created to actually help us to sustain some of these social issues that we're having to deal with now. So it is important that we look at this, but we engage the right people to actually, this is a very complex matter that needs expertise. The top 5 firms that are in Cayman employ roughly 1.2 million employees throughout the world. They're grappling with these issues daily, not only the issues today, but the issues that are coming up. So we need to be more collaborative with them and work with them and be able to understand what is the next step going down. We're not playing we're playing a chess game here, and we have to be ahead of the game. We have to ensure that we think of who is the expert and employ those people. These are all because they have a vested interest as well. So look at the private sector to get this. It would also be interesting. Andre said that he was involved. I would like to find out publicly whether or not he signed a letter or penned a letter which actually recommended that we not sign up and regulate these funds. Because had we not regulated these funds, Cayman would have been put on a blacklist for an extended period of time. And at the moment, the EU signed a treaty that allows countries to actually sanction non-compliant countries, which would mean a detrimental, disastrous impact to the financial services industry. We would have lost all correspondent banking relationship. So it's important that Andre explain why he took that position instead of following the recommendation, which actually got us off the blacklist, which was to register the private funds.
Thank you.
3 rounds of questions. We have the final round coming up right after this short commercial break. Please stay with us. Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for West Bay South. For the final round of questions, we'll begin with Mr. Shamari Scott.
Both of you have spoken about the cost of living as one of the major issues, so it should be no surprise that cost of living is here as a question.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Nicholson-Coe, we'll start with you. The cost of living ranked as a top issue for respondents in the most recent Chamber public survey. What additional strategies would you propose to address this issue beyond those you've already touched on?
Right. Well, this is a complex question and it's a complex solution, but I think there can be simple things that are done in terms of addressing long-term cost of living issues, right? And what I've seen is that persons that are actually trying or struggling is that the major cost is obviously mortgage. The second cost is actually electricity and other costs in just running their home. So my suggestion is going forward is that we create a sustainable way of reducing people's costs. So homes that are being built will encourage them to have solar panels on the roof to reduce the dependence on actually having to purchase electricity. That would reduce their ongoing operating costs, which would reduce their cost of living, and even to create reverse osmosis plants to allow them to create their own water. We have an example of this in West Bay South, actually. A fantastic boarder, Mr. Kim Jackson, who's an engineer. He actually has his own solar panels. He actually is almost off the grid. We can do this. And what we should do is when we build homes going forward, we should actually be able to insulate the homes, create them so that they're more efficient from a cost perspective, but also from an environmental perspective. Those are one of the things. The other thing that we should actually do is actually look at creating a fantastic and a world-class transportation system. So there's less reliance on your private cars, so you don't have to use fuel. You'll get a world-class, fantastic buses that actually emulate and create an environment where people would use the buses. That would actually reduce transportation costs. We could also looking at reducing cost of bandwidth and technology by bringing a cheaper bandwidth into Cayman. Because communications is critical going forward, and people use this for their businesses. But we'd have to create those things to allow people to be able to take advantage of these things by being creative in terms of what we do.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks.
Thank you very much. I think that there are three main ways, and we can be more specific here. I think there are short-term, intermediate term, and longer term. In the short term, it's in our power now to review our duties. It is a system whereby it is our consumption tax model. We need to give it life and actually use it in a manner in which direct taxing jurisdictions do the same things in order to provide economic relief in certain times and also to motivate certain behaviors. So there are now a disproportionate cost on certain duties and certain goods and services that need to be looked at so that you can offset and provide relief for those who are on the lower economic tier and raise certain other items on those who are in the upper economic tier without impacting government revenue. In the intermediate term, we need full implementation of the national energy policy so that we can reduce the cost of energy. Not just and government should be an example of this and put solar panels on every government building to encourage the private sector to move along. And in the longer term, we need to increase the earning power of Caymanians. The only other way that people will not feel the pinch is for their earning power to be increased. And we do that through education and jobs. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
The next question, staying with you, Mr. Ebanks, focuses back on some more of the environment and the future of Barkers. The head of Barkers is in the constituency of West Bay South. What is your view about the future development or preservation of this valuable natural resource and treasure?
I return again to my answer, and I repeated it from the outset, that many of these questions are going to connect back to the exact same issue. We need to enact our environmental policy that's been sitting on a shelf and have a sustainable development plan for the entire country. That way, whether it's West Bay South and our precious that should be a national park and untouched because of the value, if you read the Department of Environmental's for ports on barcas. You would be able to see how valuable it is in terms of marine life. It has to be protected. It also will go towards our agriculture, food security, and life. So it's let's zoom out for a second and not focus on just one constituency. It's the entire country where we have to protect our environment. I said it before, and I'll say it again. It is the marquee issue if there was no COVID. Later on in this year, the UK is going to try to represent all the overseas territories at the UN COP26 in Scotland. That is going to be an ample opportunity, if we really get our arms around the environment, to showcase Cayman in all its glory and go back to my plan of being able to change the image of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nicholson Co.
My answer is very simple. Yes, we have to do everything within our power, and not because it's the beauty of it, but when you walk through or use your mountain bike and ride through it, it's just an amazing place. There's a particular pool that actually sits on the northern end of it, facing North Sound. It's like a natural harbor, and it's the most amazingly still zen place. I used to ride my bike, and I would stop there with my son about 4 years ago, and we'd sit and just watch. It's just so beautiful. The fish life, the marine life, the flora and fauna is actually absolutely amazing. And the amazing thing about that is that it's only 8 minutes from here. So a stay-over tourist can actually go and see something is an untouched environment. And that is what I think when all the research that I have done in terms of people visiting a country, they want authenticity. They want to see the real Cayman Islands when they come here. And Barker's provides them with an immense array of amazing natural things that they can enjoy. And it's a historical thing. It's something that has been in Cayman for such a long time. It has a special place in everyone's heart, I think. And I think we need to promote that and promote the aspects of that particular unique gem that we have. And so there's no if, and, or buts. It's just, it has to be done. And it has to be done in a way that don't diminish the ability for us to market it as well. Because we don't want hundreds of tourists going there. We have to be careful in terms of not overpopulating it and diminishing the guest experience. But we have to preserve it. I enjoy it myself. It's 2 minutes away from my home.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Nicholson Co., this is the 18th question. It has to do with employment.
Mm-hmm.
With regards to the new Department of Work system that has been implemented in recent years, do you consider the system a success? If not, what improvements would you recommend?
I think the concept behind work is a good one. I think it's something that conceptually can work. I think what they need to do is amalgamate and bring the various agencies that are working on the work, so that bring the NAU, bring other agencies that are impacted by this to come under one umbrella. I mean, it has to do with, and my view is that technology has to be employed more. There can't be varied system not speaking to each other and not having the ability to integrate it, because we have fantastic people working in work, forget the pond, but those people are hamstrung. So we can't just continue to enable and hire more people, but if we create the technology to allow them to be more efficient. And the other thing is with this, we have to think of technology so that people don't actually have to go to a single location. If technology is employed, we could have these work satellite agencies everywhere. We could have them in employers' area. There could be an app on your phone. Everything is app driven now. So if we employ technology to actually reduce the barrier, we will get a more efficient use of the service, and we'll get greater take-up. Employers will actually then embrace it, because employers also complain that the process isn't as efficient as it should be. But the fact is they're all stakeholders. And I think if we work together in a collaborative way, and that's when these are the sorts of problems that I have solved when I was the CEO. You have these massive problems, and you look at it from 6,000 feet, and you may have issue, but you have to get your hands dirty to actually fix them. And these are the sorts of things these are the workshops that you create, that when you leave that workshop, you actually have a solution that's tangible and it can be put in the hands of people. So it has to be technology driven. It cannot be just continue to put more human resources at it, because the human resources at it will be frustrated if they don't have an efficient system. And I think conceptually it's right, but we need to rethink how we actually implemented it.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks?
Thank you. I think it's worth noting from the outset that it was a sound principle to decouple the human resources aspect away from immigration, so that you created the Customs and Border Control Department and then the Department of Work. So that, in my view, was fundamentally sound. But the issue isn't the technology, is using technology. This now then exposes the difference between grappling from the outside and knowing the civil service from the inside. They are already employing technology. The problem is that the technology they're employing isn't working. So they need to get back to a system. And in fact, from my civil service contacts, the system actually that they were using prior to this is one of the things the government has to grapple with, that you don't need necessarily a fancy system. The system that they had previously was actually working better. So the new one that they've implemented is frustrating employees. It's frustrating employees and returning you back to paper. So what needs to happen is to employ sensible technology. You don't need to have it completely state-of-the-art as long as it works and applications can go through. But more important to that is remembering the end game. The end game is to ensure that you're matching Caymanians with available opportunities and getting them to the jobs that they are qualified to do. And again, I'm going to keep harping on this, and are not left out with the excuse that they're underqualified. And in addition to that, we also have to ensure that work is working also with other agencies to ensure that you're having the upskilling of Caymanians in other areas and providing them with a wraparound support services in terms of resume writing, in terms of interviewing skills, so that they can then properly show up and be more attractive to private enterprise.
Thank you, sir.
Question 19, Mr. Ebanks, is for you to start. It focuses on pensions and pension reform. The recent withdrawal from private sector pension funds has depleted the ability for many residents to have enough funds when they retire. What ideas would you recommend to address this future shortfall?
This, again, is another one of those issues. If you look back, the chamber debates has continued to arise over and over again for electoral cycles. This is one area where I think the civil service has done itself proud with the Public Service Pension Board, where you have a system that you're paid into and is running excellently. We need to deploy something similar to that effect for the private sector, and then free up pension managers to be able to have, and this has been asked for years and years, just simple tweaks to the pension legislation to allow freedom for investment managers to make more and diverse choices in pension monies, to be able to diversify the portfolio and grow the returns. So it's a high time that we stop talking about it, implement simple changes, and then start to follow a model where the civil service can lead by example here, adopt the model, and move the country forward, because we cannot have a situation where there are Caymanians who are coming to the Government London office in the UK to retire in the UK. That is unconscionable in this society. So they are turning up to functions with students to mingle, which is great for the Cayman Islands government office to have these Caymanians overseas, but not for that reason. Not because they could not retire in dignity in their own country because the UK cost of living is cheaper. We can't allow that in this society. So we can't, and then we're losing those seniors to be able to put their minds to work as they pass retirement where they could be contributing locally. So we're losing the brain drain on both sides. The youth are not wanting to come back, and then the elderly are leaving. So what will we be left with? It's time to move the issue forward.
Thank you.
To answer the question specifically, which was to actually how do we augment the $400 million that was removed from the pension plan? And I think we have to think of how could we augment that by increasing the contribution over a period of time so it's not a shock. We should be able to do that over a 3-year period, increase it from maybe 5 to 8%. I also sat on the Chamber pension as a trustee for a while, and we did a fantastic job in terms of bringing on the costs of actually managing the pension fund. But I think what needs to happen, instead of allowing pension managers to charge on an AUM basis, assets on a management basis, it should be on a performance basis. So there's skin in the game. If you perform well, you get paid. That then incentivizes them to be able to make the best judicious decision when it comes to investing. The second thing that needs to happen, in my view, is to change the regulations to allow pension funds to invest in Cayman and invest in certain private-public sector partnerships, or even a decision to build a hotel. There are lots of pension funds now that are actually putting money into Cayman because of the attractiveness of it. They're funds, they're companies that have been set up in Cayman using pension funds from other countries or neighbor countries to invest in Cayman because of the level of returns that they get and the security that they get. Yet we are not doing that with our pension funds. I think, so there are three critical things. Increase the contribution over time that will help augment it and bridge that gap. Second thing is to force investment managers and the pension funds to be able to look at instead of an AUM model as a performance-based model. And the third is actually to allow them to invest in our own country, which will then help us to actually get better services and allow for greater returns from our own country.
Thank you.
Well, I have the pleasure of the last question of the evening.
You do? I love it.
Once again, I'm going to start with you, Mr. Nicholson Co.
Yeah.
And it has to do with a national lottery.
Right.
So the introduction of a national lottery has been discussed for many years as a way of funding education and infrastructure.
Right.
What's your view on introducing a national lottery?
Right. That's a great question, and I'm happy. I thought it was more questions than 20, but thank you for that. But so the question is on a national lottery. If it works financially, yes, I think it's something that we should look at. I mean, it has worked in other countries. It has worked in other states. Florida Lottery provides billions of dollars to education. But I think we have to look at maybe perhaps other things as well. Let's look at the sovereign wealth fund and create that sovereign wealth fund, and have it managed separately and apart from government. So when we have issues related to education, other capital projects, they can be used. We could use that fund to actually help to augment government's revenues. Because if at the moment government's cost expenditure is $827 million, revenues were $789 million, the deficit about $35 million, which is fantastic. But I think it was an anomaly because of the injection, the $200 million or $400 million of pension fund that was injected. If you multiply that by 4 from a multiplier effect, that's like over $1 billion into the economy. It actually created an anomaly. It created a consumption base that may not have existed had we not had that pension withdrawal. So my view is that we should look at the lottery, and if it does work economically and it works from a business case perspective, of course, because but it has to be earmarked for particular things. It cannot be used to do other things. But let's look at other things. Let's look and find out how we can create a sovereign wealth fund. Let's look to see how we can do this. Let's be creative in our thinking process and understand that some of these problems are not going to be created by policy. We're going to need fantastic thinkers from the financial industry to be able to help us to do this. And we have a myriad of people in Cayman that we can tap into, that we need to start utilizing them more and understanding that those persons are here for the long haul as well and want to create the right things for the country. So I'm here to unite and to work collaboratively with the civil service, with the private sector to make things work for Cayman.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ebanks.
Thank you very much. I think that a national lottery should not be a priority at this time. And with the size of our population, I have sincere doubts that will in any way have a material impact for infrastructure and other revenue for government. In addition to that, since my opponent seems concerned with FATF standards, will also then possibly impact our image to move into a gambling society. And then if you move into that realm, then you might be able to bring in social problems that we may not just be ready for. There are far easier scores on the field to be able to inject greater government revenue. We need to kickstart innovation. We need to get going with the national energy policy to create a forum where we're going to have jobs that you're going to need people power to put on solar panels. You're going to need people to build wind farms. That creates an entirely new leg of the economy with employment and real jobs and a new skill and trade. So we don't have to just gamble. We're now in a position where we are now upskilling Caymanians to really be part of the workforce in a way that actually helps the environment. In addition to that, let's continue to encourage the digital infrastructure, build in tech and STEM, embedding that into the education system. That is going to create a whole other bedrock of jobs that will allow Caymanians to flourish. So I don't think we need to gamble with our future. I think we have a reasonable underbelly of industries that are ready to be lit on fire if we give them the resources and the tools and the regulations around it to set them free. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was the final question for this forum. After this short break, We'll have closing remarks from each of the candidates. Please stay tuned. Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for West Bay South. Reach the station this evening where we're going to have closing remarks from each of our candidates. We're going to begin with Andre Ebanks.
Thank you. It's a shame that I have to use 30 seconds of my closing time to address an erroneous allegation made in this debate regarding the FATF and advice that I have provided in the course of a hardworking civil servant. But that allegation, as leveled, only served to expose my opponent's weakness in financial services. We're not blacklisted because of the private funds legislation on the FATF gray list. The FATF gray list has nothing to do with the private funds legislation. We are not on that list for that reason. And in relation to the private funds legislation, I never penned a letter ever stating that we never ever comply. It was a more legalistic argument in the manner in which we comply. But it is disturbing that your professional integrity is put on the line when you've served your country in your best interest where there's reasonable grounds for debate to have your integrity called into question. I'm really sorry that that had to happen and bit into my time, but it needed to be addressed. It was erroneous and disrespectful. Now, in terms of closing, I think that then proves one of the legs of my arguments of why I am the best qualified candidate for West Bay South. In closing, you are dealing and you're looking at a hardworking family man who has turned down a job to be able to serve the country, qualified attorney, worked in financial services and in community affairs, and represented our country. So you're looking at someone who's represented the country at an international level, a national level, and a local level. You're looking at someone who has helped to draft and negotiate legislation that is on the books of our statutes right now. It is not as easy to be able to walk in and to be able to navigate that and bring legislation and policy and execute programs over the line with solely private sector experience. You need to have a blend of experience which then matches the diversity of our constituency of financial services and community affairs. Nothing gave me greater pride than working in community affairs to execute, say, for example, the Housing Repairs Committee. So what you're looking at and what you're staring at is someone who won't have to learn the rules of the road when they enter into the halls of the government admin building. You're looking at someone who is ready, no knees, no on-guard training, and going to rely just on private sector experience and thinks that that cuts it.
Thanks, Will. The countries, okay, thank you, Will. It's the countries at a crossroads, and there are tough decisions that are going to be made. And just to clarify the point, I wasn't talking about lottery in terms of gambling. I was talking about, the question was specifically on lottery, it wasn't about gambling. So I think that needs to be clarified as well, and that was my response. But the countries at a crossroads, we need to be able to fix the fundamental issues that are affecting our Caymanian people. The people that are elderly, the Caymanian youth that are struggling to understand how to survive in this new economy. We need people that are thinkers and strategists. We need people that can understand broad-based issues, that have worked collaboratively with people from the civil service. I have great friends in the civil service. In fact, today I got a call from a very senior civil servant who's just elated that I've decided to put my hand in the political arena, because I've worked with them for so many times. I've had nothing but amazing experience with the civil service, even during COVID. So I understand what they have to deal with. I also understand how to work collaboratively with people. I have worked with multinational corporations. Now we have the ability to have, there are lots of investors looking to come to Cayman. We need people that understand economics, understand business, to be able to create an environment where not only is business successful, but the benefits that accrue to our Caymanian people and our true Caymanian people is beneficial to them not only today, but in perpetuity. We cannot think of agreements that are done through policy. We need to have business leaders, people that understand these things and have negotiated deals that will allow the Cayman people to benefit, that give them true opportunities, that ensure that when we decide to build, Caymanian entrepreneurs are given the opportunity to be successful. This isn't the time for us to look introspectively. We need to look outwardly and say, how can we make Cayman a much better place for everyone, so that when our kids finish university, they actually feel that they can come back here. So this is a fantastic job for me. I'm looking forward on April 15th to be the representative for West Bay South, to ensure that West Bay South gets a leader and a representative that's there 365 days a year, 24/7, constantly, that will not be leaving the district, that will remain. I've remained there for 43 years, and I'm going to continue to remain there because I don't want to live anywhere else. That's the only place I want to be, and I'm going to make this the best place for West Bayers to live.
I'd like to thank the candidates. Now I'm going to turn it over to President Mike Gibbs for some closing remarks.
Thank you, Will. On behalf of the Chamber Council and staff, I'd like to thank the West Bay South candidates for participating in this evening's forum. I trust that the forum will help the voters in that constituency to determine who to vote for when you go to the polls on April the 14th. I'd also like to thank Foster's for their major sponsorship of the Chamber's candidate forums, as well as Affinity Recruitment, Bodden's Legal and Corporate, and DART. If you're interested in viewing more of the Growth Matters video series that have been playing during tonight's commercial breaks, they can be viewed at growthmatters.ky. Please join us Friday evening as we welcome Joseph Hugh and Johan Moxon from the constituency of Georgetown North. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you will join us tomorrow evening at the same time. Good night.